Canis held the will in his hand, his eyes wide, and exclaimed in surprise, "This is mine." Sakari sat across from him, smiling kindly and nodding in affirmation. "Exactly." Sakari continued, his eyes still fixed on Canis. "It all belongs to you." Sakari's expression suddenly changed, and she frowned, asking, What are you thinking?" Canis recalled the painful memories, his expression bitter. "I can't even ask Master anymore." The image of Arcane appeared in Canis's mind, his face filled with sorrow. Canis stammered, What is this?" Canis gritted his teeth, recalling his painful past. "Master never cared even a little whether I lived or died." Canis read the words written in the will, disbelief flashing in his eyes, "And now he calls me a disciple." Sakari looked at Canis and said calmly, "However, there is one thing I'd like to confirm." Sakari explained, "It seems Arcane left you his will because he considered you his disciple." Sakari frowned and said in a low voice, "But isn't Arcane a dark magic user who specializes in controlling others?" The question struck like lightning, leaving Canis speechless and with his head bowed. Arin and Canis stood facing Sakari. Sakari spoke, her eyes scrutinizing them. "You two, could it be that you weren't brainwashed as children?" Canis exclaimed in surprise, What? What are you talking about?" Sakari replied slowly, a meaningful expression on his face. "The truth is, brainwashing children doesn't even require magic." Sakari continued to explain, "If a child is saved from the brink of death, then the person who saves them will become special, a godlike being to them. After that, they will tell the child that they have something they need. That child will dedicate their entire life to..." Canis gritted his teeth and roared angrily, "Don't spout such nonsense in my presence. My master has never demanded anything from me. Everything I've done has been of my own free will. I wrote as much in my testimony." Arin stood beside them worriedly and asked, "So, what's the point of us saying we've been brainwashed?" Sakari smirked and replied, "You will be acquitted." Canis said in a surprised, strained voice, "We will." Arin asked, bewildered, "Innocent?" Canis gritted his teeth, his eyes blazing. "Is he toying with us?" Sakari said calmly, "The association's view is as follows. In this investigation, their priority is to consider the view that Arcane has brainwashed the children. Without that, Canis and Arin would have no reason to commit such heinous crimes. However, if that did happen..." Canis suddenly stood up, growling, "I won't receive the inheritance because I won't be considered a disciple of Arcane." Sakari smiled mysteriously. "If you admit that you've been brainwashed, then you'll no longer be disciples of Arcane." Sakari sat at the table, his fingers resting on a piece of paper. "If that happens, this wealth will be considered an illegal fund," he said. Sakari continued, "And the association will confiscate it." Canis stood facing Sakari, his eyes sharp and cold. Sakari handed the waiver of inheritance form to Canis and said, "Just sign here." Sakari added, "And you will be innocent." Canis looked down, darkness engulfing him. Finally, horrific memories flooded back as Canis and Arin stood on a dilapidated street under a blazing red moon. Canis said, "This place is no different from Ladome. Number. They're hiding it skillfully," Canis said, "but it reeks worse than the Ladome slums." Canis held the inheritance waiver in his hand, looking down. "This world," Canis gritted his teeth, "reeks of blood and decay, just a giant battlefield." Sakari looked at Canis and said, "I'll give you some time. Is an hour enough?" Canis replied resolutely, "I will." Sakari smiled. Wise choice. Canis lowered his head, placed the pen on the paper, and began to write. A few minutes later, Canis looked up and asked Sakari, "What should we do now?" Sakari handed Canis an envelope, then said, "You can leave now. You're free." Arin stood beside Sakari and asked, "What about the procedures for getting out of here?" Sakari waved his hand and replied, "Nothing like that. Just leave." Canis gritted his teeth. His face changed. "These bastards." Canis recalled the past. From the beginning, all they wanted was the master's property. Arin was still quietly sitting behind, looking at her brother with a worried expression. Finally, Canis exclaimed bitterly, "I think I understand now how great my master is." "On this continent, no nation can do anything," Canis shouted. At that moment, Canis slammed his hand on the table, startling Arin, and asked in a strained voice, "Which grade are you in?" Sakari, who was about to leave the room, answered, "What if I said I was in 5th grade?" Canis gnashed his teeth, his eyes wide with rage. "I will retreat now, but I swear I will make you regret the day you met me." Sakari rubbed the back of his neck, sneering. TSK, you just got out of here yourself. Sakari adjusted his collar, a glint of interest in his eyes. Well, I'm certainly looking forward to that. Canis and Arin stood next to each other, Canis speaking in a deep, husky voice. Arin said, you did the right thing. Better this than to rot in prison for the rest of your life. Canis stared straight ahead, his gaze resolute. We must become stronger. Yes, Arin replied, her voice soft but full of determination. Next, an image of a sign reading, Investigation Room Number 3 appears. The inspector standing in the office said to someone, Sakari approached and said, thanks to Arcane's death, everything was resolved smoothly. The inspector continued calmly, just leave the documents on my desk. Sakari entered and hesitantly asked, what about the Alpia's Milch case? The inspector turned his back, looked out the window, and pondered, why do you think this will cause public outrage? He mused, I wonder if a 6-month license suspension is too lenient a punishment. The inspector continued his monologue, his voice full of concern. Perhaps 40 years have passed, but his involvement in an illegal experiment. And even as a victim of the school attack, shouldn't he be held responsible? In the formal office, Sakari began, a hint of hesitation in his voice. If we're talking about 4.8 billion in gold, then it's not that I couldn't accept it, but the inspector looked at Sakari and asked inquisitively, so what's your point? The inspector's eyes narrowed, his voice hardening. Are you implying that someone like me would make an unfair judgment? Sakari quickly bowed his head, stammering, I'm sorry, it was just a slip of the tongue. The inspector coldly ordered, you may leave. The door slammed shut. The inspector clicked his tongue. Shh. The inspector rubbed his shoulder and muttered, the place where I was hit still hurts. This inspector was actually Seraph. Memories of the past from 40 years ago suddenly surfaced, and a scream echoed in the darkness. Bastard. Seraph is being beaten by a younger Alpies for daring to enter Alpies' house uninvited and taunt his wife. Seraph cried out in pain, his face slammed into the ground by Alpius' blow. Seraph, ah! Seraph muttered to himself as he signed his name with a luxurious fountain pen. I should have brought a gift. Then Seraph looked up, frowning slightly. Although I may be late. Seraph held the elegant nameplate and solemnly said, this gift is to congratulate you on winning the Golden Circle Award. And sign the incriminating documents. Inspector Saraf Aldiano. The scene shifts to Alperis Magic Academy, an ancient castle, nestled amidst lush greenery, bathed in the morning sun, creating a magnificent spectacle. Hurried footsteps echoed on the cobblestone street. Those were the footsteps of 3 students, Need, Eriki, and Sharon, who greeted the morning in unison. Good morning, headmaster. Hearing this, Alpius, an old man in a straw hat who was bending over in the garden, laughed heartily and replied, I told you, don't call me principal anymore. The old man continued, his voice gentle, I'm just an old man now. Need still refused. No way. Once a headmaster, always a headmaster. Sharon politely asked, is there anything I can do to help? Alpice chuckled and waved his hand, saying, if you help me, I'll have nothing left to do. Alpius looked up and asked the students, how is school going? Reopening must be exhausting for you all, right? The 3 students groaned in unison, we're about to go crazy. How can we possibly achieve 80 points in all subjects in the remaining time? Alpius reassured them, come on, you'll all be in 4th grade next semester. He looked up and asked, right? A month ago, after finishing their research presentation together for graduation, the 3 of them shouted in unison, we won't become idiots. They promised that they would all be promoted to the 4th grade together next semester, but immediately afterward, the Arcane Grand Mage attacked the school. And the result was, we couldn't study at all. Need clutched his head and groaned, a score diagram with 2 red and blue lines appearing above him. He anxiously said, this is a huge problem. How am I supposed to double my score? I'm doomed. Iruki leaned back, the image of a math test, with a perfect score of 100 appearing above his head, while his humanities score was a mere 10. He casually said, as for me, I'm only good at math. You're probably the best, Need. Need stared wide-eyed at the 2 of them, her voice filled with despair. You guys are the best at practical exercises. I'm the worst. Need suddenly changed his tone. More importantly, Sharon stood in the schoolyard and sighed. I can't focus on my studies. Sharon added, there have been too many big incidents happening lately. The school is still quite chaotic. Need said loudly. It's ridiculous to study now. Need raised his hand looking excited. Let's just have fun today. We'll start studying tomorrow. Aruki nodded in agreement. That's right. Sharon looked at them both, feeling convinced. That makes sense. Sharon suddenly exclaimed, pointing forward, "Ah, you two, look." Need, startled, widened his eyes as he looked into the distance and exclaimed, "Huh?" The boy standing next to him, Aruki, also looked in the direction Need was looking and asked curiously, "What's wrong?" Need, not taking his eyes off the approaching figures, asked with confusion, "Why are they here?" From afar, Canis called out, "Hey." Canis and Arin walked closer. Canis looked around and said, "Looks like class is over, huh?" Arin stood next to Canis, looking rather uninterested. Canis continued, "We'll be staying here from now on, so we came to take a look around." Hearing that, Need was surprised and stammered, "What?" Sharon, standing next to him, also didn't understand what was happening and asked, "What do you mean?" Canis shrugged and replied, "Actually, I don't like it very much either." Then Canis turned to Arin and said in a low voice, "But if you want to succeed, then entering the Magic Academy is the fastest way." Need looked down with disdain and said in a challenging voice, "Are you looking down on the Magic Academy? Who said they'd accept you?" "Senior." Canis immediately raised a finger, his tone lecturing. Sharon, Aruki, and Need were stunned. "Huh?" Aruki, Sharon, and the others were standing in front of him. Canis pointed at one of them and said in a mocking tone, "You too? I heard you're in the 5th grade." Canis smirked and replied, "I'm in 4th grade." Arin stood next to Canis, giggling, while Canis continued, "I am your senior."